Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Knick Season 1, Episode 1. It's called Method and Madness. I will just say spoiler warning for this, because it's the first episode, and there's not too much to spoil anyway. But I don't have to worry about holding back during this one, since it is a pretty old pilot. I'm reviewing this because it was a paid-for, tipped review on a live stream. This came out in 2014. It is a Cinemax show. Back when they made more original dramas and stuff like that. I remember the billboards. I remember it being advertised at the time. I never saw it. I knew it was something medical in nature because I remember surgeon gloves and things on the posters and whatnot, but never saw it. So this is me checking it out for the first time today. It's set at the turn of the century, 1900. At the Knickerbocker Hospital in New York. Clive Owen is the lead character, or lead actor I should say, and he plays Dr. Thackeray. And the show largely is kind of about where medicine was at the time, and kind of the effort that it takes to, well, at least what I'm getting from the first episode anyway, is the effort to push through new techniques, new methods that at the time might seem quite radical or possibly even psychotic to some people, but alongside that also pushing social boundaries and kind of all these things tying in together. I think one of the things that really stuck out about this first episode is obviously you've got the medical things that are being pushed forward, and Clive Owen's this kind of hot-headed and very sure of himself, but he's pushing these new things. They're doing these surgeries in front of an audience. Not just random people, obviously. I'm sure it's medical, professionals and other things like that. But you've got all this going on, but you also have the other lead character is played by André Holland, is a black man. Obviously, because André Holland is a black man. But Dr. Edwards, his character, he comes to the hospital, and I actually did find it kind of refreshing that they didn't sugarcoat how people reacted to him. Clive Owen's character, who is our lead character, does not take kindly to this. He has kind of some really cold-hearted, logical reasons for not being happy with the idea of having a black doctor be his second in command. I can't remember the exact job role was called. Assistant surgeon, assistant head surgeon, whatever. But he says something to the effect of, if I was a salesman, I'd never put something on the shelf that people wouldn't buy. And likewise, I can't have a surgeon that none of the patients will feel comfortable being operated on. And so much of this obviously ties into this idea of pushing through the norms and pushing things forward. So it's not just the medical techniques and practices that are being pushed forward in the story of the show. It's also the social thing. So you have this black doctor at an otherwise all-white hospital, and him having to change the hearts and minds of the people he works with, and also the patients potentially. And I'm sure there's going to be stories in the show of patients who aren't comfortable with him operating on them. So and it's not that Clive Owen has this change of heart by the end of the episode. I'm sure he will learn to respect André Holland's character over the course of the show. I assume that's part of the plot, because of his medical know-how and for whatever other reasons. But in this first episode, he is forced to hire him. The hospital is going through some financial troubles. There's this rich family that are kind of funding a lot of it, and they want this guy. They want Dr. Edwards to be hired, and he's not happy about this. He sees this as them just being rich people who are experimenting with their money and doing something progressive. He's not happy about it. He wants his dude that already works there, who, funnily enough, makes some mistakes in this episode and kind of shows the audience that maybe he isn't right for this job yet. Maybe he is a bit too gun-ho, and he's not happy, obviously, being replaced by someone else, and certainly seems to take a particular offense to it being a black man. So and then there's some characters who do act a bit nicer, and there's another doctor guy who's the smaller character so far, and a nurse who seem to take kinder to his presence. But it doesn't shy away from some of the main characters being kind of scummy about it. Another main character is the administrative guy. I didn't catch everyone's name in this first episode, but he also doesn't seem to like it very much. He uses some dodgy language at one point. He's still very much, when he still enforces the rich family's thing because he's obviously a money guy first. He doesn't let it get in the way of that. But his initial reaction is still not very pleasant, and it's still kind of, it's off-putting. But I like that it didn't shy away from even the main characters being kind of shitheads when it came to this. And Dr. Edwards is a character that wants, he basically feels unwelcome right from the get-go. He doesn't really want to stick around, and he's actually going to leave towards the end of the episode. And it's only when he becomes so impressed with the new little tool and procedure that Clive Owen's character uses that he says, "Nah, screw that, I'm staying here because I can learn a lot from you. So I'm going to put up with all the other bullshit that I'm going to have to live with in the meantime." And I would assume that over the course of the show that there is a respect for him, that Clive Owen's character does improve. I've not even mentioned yet that he's addicted to cocaine and injecting cocaine at that. I didn't even know what he was taking at first. I just saw him injecting something into his toes, and it wasn't until later where he's going through withdrawal and he sort of says what it is to the nurse to help him. But so obviously you've got a very flawed character, a lot of flawed characters in general, really. It delves into a few other characters. There's some ambulance drivers, which kind of feeds into some of the corruption that's going on in the city, and like people poaching bodies for payoffs and things like that. A little bit of the churches here as well. There's a nun who's one of the characters on the show, that deals with a funeral early on, and she's got some wisecracks with the ambulance drivers who kind of like give her some shit. So there's kind of a wide cast of characters introduced in the first episode, which I think there's a decent job of setting them all up to be kind of distinct. Obviously there's a lot of names. I tend to be bad with names at first anyway, so it takes time for that stuff to sink in, but generally speaking, I think they did a decent job in this of setting up the fairly distinct set of characters. Which ones are more likable, which ones are a bit more confrontational, all that kind of thing. I think I did a good job of that. There's a really on the nose bit of symbolism in this episode, actually, which I actually did quite like. So throughout the episode, it's mentioned that they're converting the hospital to be electric, right? They're putting in electricity, right? Obviously, that sounds funny to us in present day, but this is exactly the sort of time period where that would have been a transitionary process for a lot of places. And so we see some workmen in the background in a few scenes putting in cables in the walls for the lights and things like that. But at the end of the episode, after this surgery on the patient that's been kind of teased throughout, where Clive Owen eventually does this surgery and succeeds, might I add, because he fails at the start. There's a whole tragic start of the episode where Matt Frewer plays a character. He was the old head surgeon who ultimately commits suicide because his attempted surgery on a pregnant woman fails and both the mother and the child die. And we find out that this is like the 17th time he's done this, and it's the 17th death on his hands. So we get a really sort of dark start to the episode. But the episode ends, Clive Owen's leaving the office, and he's put his hat on. And as he walks out, and there's still workmen putting in the electricity, but some of them are already up and running. So the glow of the light in this old building that's being converted, shines bright. So the symbolism there is pretty obvious. It ties into this idea of moving forward with the times and integrating new techniques, new people, new, just new ideas into everything. And this is the way forward, and there has to be some acceptance of it. And there's even a line earlier on where Clive Owen, he's not against getting electricity, that's not quite what it is, but basically, they might not have money to do it, and Clive Owen doesn't give a shit. And it's the administrative guys like, no, we need to go electric, we have to move forward with this, we have to get with the times. And obviously the need for that is quite simple and basic, and we can all understand that as the audience, but that kind of spirals thematically into everything else in the episode. So it's tackling subjects at the time, obviously disease at the time, tuberculosis is brought up a couple times and things like that, but I think that was the writing in the episode that I appreciated the most, was its kind of harsh look at this without sugarcoating it too much. Obviously, there are some nicer characters to make it feel like it's not a completely awful, like, unpleasant world. But yeah, it's harsh, and it doesn't feel particularly pleasant. Not to say that there's not some comedy in there. There is some kind of hard wit, I will call it. In fact, one of the times that made me laugh the most is at the start of the surgery towards the end of the episode. It's when André Holland's character, Dr. Edwards, says he's going to leave after this surgery. He's going to stay here because he's dedicated to patients until this patient is okay. But when that's done, he's leaving. And Clive Owen just turns to the guy that he wanted to pick for his second and says, "Congratulations on the promotion." And that actually made me laugh because it was just such a dry wit. But then later on in the scene when André Holland says, "You know what? No, I'm going to stay because I'm going to learn everything I can from you." It cuts back to the proposed second guy, and he just has this look of like, supposed to be my job. So, and he's got a bit of a punchable face. So him being pissy about this is entertaining to watch. I actually know him, of all things, from the actor who plays this character, who was supposed to get that job. He was in the 50 Shades of Grey movies and is a really stupid character. Not that most of the characters in that story are stupid, but he was a particularly stupid character in that series. And yes, I watched them for review for reasons. That's all. Don't question it. Just move on. So yeah, that was a weird thing, seeing him there and noticing him. Yeah, performances are by and large very good throughout. I did feel a little worried at first that it was going to have that sleazy Cinemax, Stars, Showtime feel to it, right? Because all those like cable channels that make original content, HBO does it as well to an extent, but HBO like started off so prestigious that it kind of gets away from it a little bit. But all those networks I kind of associate with just sleaze for the sake of sleaze because they're a cable network. And the first scene of the episode, which is Clive Owen's character seemingly in some kind of brothel, there is like full frontal nudity within the first like 10 seconds, and I sort of like had a bit of an eye roll and went, oh, here we go. But to be fair, it actually didn't have any other nudity for the rest of the episode, and there was even moments with cadavers or like patients that I thought there could have been very clinical, justifiable nudity, and they didn't even do that. They always had them covered up as much as they could. So my mild fears there. I mean, I'm sure there's nudity in the rest more episodes because it was there at the start of the episode, but it wasn't like coming in thick and fast for no reason, which I appreciate. It's set up that our main character is flawed, that he has some demons that he's working through. He's rushing to the hospital. Well, he's not even rushing. He's actually telling the cab driver to take his time. And when I say cab driver, obviously I mean horse and carriage, just in case that wasn't clear. But he's injecting cocaine into his feet. He was kind of desperate later on when he's lying with withdrawal symptoms, and the nurse that comes by to fetch him has to help him inject it. Ultimately, because he's already ruined his body with like injecting himself, she has to do it in his penis. He whips that out because she needs a bigger vein, and it just kind of shows in the desperation of the character, where he seems so because he's this same nurse he grilled out earlier in the episode for making a mistake. He's very tough on people. He's very sure of himself and is constantly biting at people and being very stern, like he was with André Holland's character. So him having this secret, and the fact that the nurse by the end of the episode is aware that he has this problem and that she's in on that, does set up an interesting dynamic, I think, for the potential stories going forward, because she's aware of his weakness, and will look at him differently because of that. And there's even a moment in the final surgery scene where he asks for a small solution of cocaine for the patient, and she sort of pauses like, oh, I know things about you. And I think that's, again, an interesting sort of dynamic that changes the power between them a little bit. It changes, because before he was just a stern boss who was going to bark down at her, and now she knows something intimate and something he's probably ashamed of about him, and that could potentially lead to a lot of interesting stories. One thing I do have to comment on as well in this opening episode, and I assume this is going to keep up for the show given the premise, is the practical effects for the surgery scenes. They're very I mean, I don't know, I mean, I won't say authentic, because I mean, they feel authentic. I don't know how authentic they are in terms of actual visuals of the time period and what it looks like when you cut into someone, but they feel authentic. They feel like there's a lot of practical, like, prosthetics and props that have been made for them to cut into that ooze blood. You've got a guy like spinning the wheel to drain the blood, because obviously it's 1900, so it's you know, we don't have quite the same technology. And you know, they're lifting up flaps, they're lifting up, you know, parts of tissue and organs, and they're and obviously you've probably seen, you know, scenes in other movies and TV shows with the whole, you know, doctors holding up parts of the insides of a human body and things like that. But this felt a little bit more visceral. Like, I think the scenes as well, how they're directed, which, by the way, the first episode is directed by Steven Soderbergh. Like, there's no music playing out during the surgery scene. It's all very awkward and quiet, and all you hear is the sounds of like the wet and the flesh and the mucus, and then of course what they're saying to each other, and they're breathing as they're trying to work on a patient, and they're trying to stay calm as they're trying to keep the patient alive. It really, you feel every disgusting part of it. But it also doesn't feel like gross out disgusting either. It does feel clinically disgusting, and I guess that's a really interesting and, you know, appropriate balance to strike. But it's interesting that they were able to do that, and I wonder if just the way they're describing what they're doing as they're doing it, and why they're cutting certain things, why they're pulling out this particular part of the body, always feels like everything has a purpose, and it always feels like it's not shying away from it. And it's not gratuitous in the sense that the whole point of this show is to show and convey how tough it is, and convey that this is kind of the Wild West to an extent of developing new medical practices and where things were at the time. And to move forward, you have to face the brutal reality of it, kind of thing. So I understand why it's taking this really harsh look at it. And I think that does add a lot to especially the early scene when they're operating on the pregnant woman, because that's like her first big medical scene after the introduction of the main character, and it is quite hard hitting. It's quite nail biting. You're kind of like sort of paying attention to the details. It makes you sort of lean in and pay attention to the details. So I think that's pretty well done, and I would compliment that. So that's good stuff. Yeah, it's a pretty solidly directed first pilot. I'm not a big Steven Soderbergh fan, generally speaking. Not necessarily because his direction's bad, but just because I don't think I like a lot of the types of material that he tends to be attracted to. At least from the stuff that I've seen. You know, I kind of liked Unsane, but the other Soderbergh movies that I've seen didn't leave me all that thrilled. But I think this is a fairly confident piece of direction in the way that it handles all of its material. And, you know, much like not shying away from the racism of the time period, not shying away from the gory part of surgery, makes sense. Again, those two things, again, thematically kind of link up a little bit. We have to accept the ugly parts of, you know, things getting better and the struggles of going through, you know. So in the same way that we have to endure some characters being racist, and André's, you know, André Holland's character in particular has to endure the racism that he's going through to become a better doctor, to hopefully reach a time where he will be accepted into, like, a hospital like this to advance things forward. He has to, like, put up with a lot of shit in the same way that some patients are going to have to die, sadly, as they develop these new techniques, because very few of them are going to work first time. You know, like, they have to, like, come up with why, they have to learn from their failures and understand why things worked and why things didn't. So yeah, thematically those things again link up quite nicely. So yeah, from this first episode, I would definitely say if you're interested in what I've said in the premise and what it's tackling, I'd say give it a go. There's enough here that had I watched this back in 2014, I might have stuck around for it and saw some more episodes. I do understand, obviously, there's only 2 seasons of this show, and technically it ended before its time. But as it was explained to me by the person who got this review commissioned, it was sort of, it still has an ending because it was sort of planned to jump ahead in time every couple of seasons. So this first 2 seasons is the 2 seasons with this cast in this time period, and a season 3 would have jumped forward in time to I think post World War II with a completely new cast. So while there should have been more, and thematically that would have been nice to have, 3 or maybe 4 time periods over a span of several seasons, the story of these characters in this time period does actually end with the end of season 2, is my understanding. So it's not one where you have to worry about it having like no ending or anything like that. Although I'm sure there's some ambiguity in a sense because it wasn't thematically the end of the show, but I think this kind of semi anthology style means that I assume it ends with a decent ending. So something to keep in mind just in case you're worried about that. But there you go. That is my thoughts on the first episode of The Knick. So let me know what you think of the pilot and if the show as a whole, if you've seen it. I'd be curious to hear people's thoughts of how it progressed through its 2 seasons. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, and of course you can support everything by hitting the super thanks button on the YouTube video, or of course you can go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us on a monthly basis over there. I mentioned this being a commission on a live stream, which is sometimes something I offer. Live streams now are over on Twitch, which is twitch.tv/MailFuzzTV. Mostly gaming streams, but we do watch party streams and things like that, and occasional things like trivia nights and whatnot. So if you're interested in that, you can head over there and have a look as well. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?